Do you know the meaning of your family name?
I didn't hear the first part of what you said.
You have to say loud.
Do you know the meaning of your family name?
Yes, I've read about it, but I couldn't tell you what it is, what the meaning of the word is. Hershberger. In German, it had a particular meaning.
Well, it's the burger of Hirsch, which means it was the person, like the mayor of the vicinity of Hirsch. That's where the burgers always came from.
Okay.
Hershberger. So
I remember reading about it, but I don't remember specifically what it was.
Are there any stories about the origin of your family name? Did you have... Oh, wait. Are these two different ones?
Yeah, no, where I have it checked.
Oh.
Just where I have it checked.
Sorry.
Forget that question. Just anything where I have it checked, okay?
I thought that was one question.
Nope.
Sorry. Did you have any nicknames as a child?
You got to say it louder and
Oh,
speak so
sorry,
we can't hear you.
sorry. Did you have any nicknames as a child?
No, matter of fact, I was called Jimmy as a child.
Well, that's a nickname.
All right.
Yes.
But, and I had an aunt, my mother's sister, Aunt Liza, who called me Jimmy all her life. I was Jimmy as long as I lived with her, as long as she lived.
What are your 3 best qualities?
My 3 best qualities? Honesty is one of them. And people don't always like that very well, but I try to be as honest with people as I possibly can be. Let's see. Truthfulness is another one. And working as a counselor, sometimes that's difficult to handle because people don't like to hear the truth about themselves. And I think I have a good sense of humor.
What are your 3 worst qualities?
I don't know that I have 3 worst qualities, but I'd have to think about that one a little bit.
What's the typical Hershberger trait? Stubbornness? We could go with that, couldn't we, Leah?
Well, we'll select stubbornness as one of them.
Okay.
That's the next question.
What is your favorite book or author and why?
My favorite author of all time was a man by the name of Hemingway, who wrote several books. And I couldn't even tell you the titles now because I read them a long time ago. But he had a particular style of writing, and he was good at what he did. And it was excellent English. It was short and to the point, every sentence. So he wasn't wordy like a lot of people are.
Okay. If you could have 3 wishes right now, what would they be?
That's a tough one, really. Well, one of the things that I think people always wish for is more income. We could always use more income, but that's not very realistic. The second wish is that I wish my parts were not wearing out quite so quickly. And my parts of the body are wearing out at age 85. I'm getting older. And as I've said so many times, the sissies don't grow older.
It's 2 wishes. What's the third one?
That's 2. What's another one?
Sleep.
That's what Nana said.
What?
Third wish, I wish that my wife's health were better, and I wish she did not have the difficulties that she's been having with her knees and with her pain.
Yeah. Oh, she's sleeping.
She watching you.
Oh, she's sleeping a little bit. If you won $1 million tomorrow, what would you do with your money?
I would probably end up giving most of it away. And I have 2 sons and their families who would make sure that they were comfortable. And I would spend a certain amount of it, at least 10 and maybe even 20% of it, helping other people who need financial help.
Tell them to start playing the lottery then, please.
Okay. What is the highest award or honor you have ever received?
That's an easy one. I was invited back after I completed my doctorate and was teaching at Kutztown Graduate School for a number of years. I was invited back to the university, Penn State University, as a visiting scholar. That doesn't happen to very many people. You can usually count them on one hand in a year's time. And I was one of those people that was invited back to the university to spend a year. And I could sit in on any course that was being taught as long as there was a chair there. Didn't have to write a paper and didn't have to take any exams at all. But, and I studied gerontology while I was there for that year and enjoyed every moment of it. And it was quite an honor to receive that because I was invited back as a visiting scholar, but also as a guest of the university. They gave me an office, I had a secretary, any machines I needed I had use of, and that was the highest honor I think I've ever been ever achieved, quite frankly.
Yeah. What kind of things bring you the most pleasure now?
Let's see. I get a lot of pleasure out of reading, and the second thing is I get a lot of pleasure out of still volunteering to work with people. And I like to be around people. Learned that a long time ago. And the third one is that I can still travel whenever we need to or whenever we want to.
What things frighten you now?
One of the things that frightens me the most is that Muslim president that we have in the White House. He scares me because I'm very fearful that the same thing will happen to this nation that is happening to the countries in Europe. And they're very quickly becoming Muslim controlled. And that has happened because of a thing that we call political correctness. And I think that is the worst kind of discriminatory practice that any nation could have, but we've got it. And I think that we're going to suffer more. Your generation is really going to hurt from what's happening now. And that scares me.
What is one thing you've always wanted but never got?
One thing that I've wished for and never got?
What is one thing you've always wanted but never got?
What's one thing you always wanted, but you never got?
I've got most of the things that I've always wanted. I would have to think about that one. That's a hard question. Because I cannot think of immediate things that I've wanted that I never had.
Where is one place in the world you would like to see but never have?
If I had one choice about that, I'd take a trip around the world one time.
Okay. Do you have any hobbies or special interests?
My special interest right now is more reading than anything else. And I think a second interest in particular is the volunteer work that I do in different places for different people. I volunteer at Homewood, and I volunteer to drive children to the Shriners hospitals, and I volunteer to do work at our Japa shrine in Altoona, and I enjoy working with people.
What things are most important to you now and why?
Oh. Well, the most important thing to me right now, personally, is that I would wish that there were ways of aging that were a little easier to put up with. But there aren't, and they're tough, and I would wish the same thing for Shirley as well, and for my family and those people closely related to me.
If you were to look into a mirror right now, what would you see?
I'd see a man that had little hair. Compared to high school, when I had waves of hair back over my head.
He used to tell me when I was in my 20s, just wait, you're going to lose your hair.
You have me turned off now?
A little section here. Then you and I will finish up tomorrow.
Okay.
What is something you remember about your 20s?
Something I remember about my what?
Your
20s.
20s. When you were in your 20s. What's a highlight that you remember your 20s?
In the 20s, I remember that after a graduate class that I was taking at Penn State, I walked downtown, walked past a car dealer, and he had an antique automobile in the show window. And Shirley and I ended up buying that car for $360. All right. It was a 1928 DeSoto with a rumble seat. And that's one of the things that I remember about my 20s.
What about your 30s?
30s, one of the things I remember most about the 30s is that we adopted your dad.
Your 40s?
Probably the most outstanding thing of the 40s is that I was invited back to the university as a visiting scholar.
Your 50s?
My 50s, the thing I remember most are my graduate students at Kutztown, and working as an associate dean of graduate studies as well as a professor in counseling and psychology.
Your 60s?
60s, I began to, in the late 60s, I began to work full-time for the Lutheran Church, the Northeast Pennsylvania Synod. It had 14 counties, from Berks County all the way to the New York border, and then all the way over to Easton, so it was a big corner of northeastern Pennsylvania. And we had 300 congregations. And I ran a couple social service agencies for the Lutheran Church.
Your 70s?
In the 70s, I was still doing that. And then whenever we made a major move from Kutztown to the community at Martinsburg that we live in now, that occurred at age 75, 76.
And your 80s?
The 80s, what I remember most is that my heart's wearing out. And this past September 23rd was 30 years since I had a triple heart bypass. 8 years ago they put 2 stents in, and this past summer we put 2 stents in. And my cardiologist told me a long time ago in Reading, and they were people I respect very much and still do to this day, that when my heart stopped, I would stop. And I hope it's that simple.
Okay. If you could go back to any age, what age would it be and why?
You have a chance to go back to a certain age.
Yeah, the problem with that is that I worked all my life doing the kinds of things that I wanted to do. And I took jobs that I liked to do, and I worked with people that I liked to work with. And
yeah, but if a genie popped up here right now and said, "Listen, you got one chance. You can go back to a certain age and be there for a short period of time,"
then I would go back to a period of time that we spent in Kutztown when we were raising 2 sons, and those years together.
Good answer.
How do you feel about growing old?
Growing old is something that I prepared for, because when I was a visiting scholar at Penn State, I studied gerontology for a whole year. And that's the science of aging. And so I know how it occurs, I'm familiar with it, I'm experiencing it, and you really don't have to like it. It's happening anyway, you know.
What is the hardest thing about growing old?
The hardest thing about growing old is the increasing limitations that I have. I get tired much more quickly now than what I used to, for example. And that's kind of disgusting with me, because I haven't run out of gas, so to speak, for years. But now we do. And so my wife and I both just go sit down. And that's something we didn't do 10 years ago.
What is the best thing about growing old?
The best thing about growing old is that we've been able to maintain fairly decent health. And that's been a pleasure. But we've had to work at it, both my wife and I.
Is there anything in your life you wish you would have done differently?
Wish I would have done what?
Differently.
Differently?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are always small things that you wish you had done differently. But I don't recall anything that was earth-shattering that I would turn around and do differently than what. Because as I said, we made the moves we wanted to make, and I had the jobs that I wanted and desired.
Say thank you for your time, Papa.
Thank you, Papa.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
Let's get a quick picture of today's interviewer, if we can. I don't know if I can bend it down far enough. Oh, there she is.
Hi.
Thank you for helping with the interview process, Leah
You're
Hershberger. Very nice.
And Sam.